Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Please like and subscribe, share so we can get some in-depth conversations going on about serious mental illness and mental well-being, in particular in communities of color. So this morning, I was actually going to record outside this little French cafe. I'm just kind of amazed at how many people are off work during the week. I was out this morning around 11 o'clock, and the coffee shop where I was going to record had a parking lot full of cars. And so I knew that it would be disruptive to try to record in the tables outside of the coffee shop. So then I drove down the street to my local library, and I was again amazed at how many cars are in the parking lot in the middle of a weekday morning. And I'm just thinking, why are people not at work? What is going on, y'all? So eventually I decided to record at this park. Today's topic is going to be about how I first realized that there was something going on with my loved one who was eventually diagnosed with a serious mental illness. What was going on? Initially, I was thinking that it was just a kid being a kid, maybe more mischievous than usual, and eventually I had to recognize that it was something more serious than that. This park right here is a park that I used to come to with my younger kids. At the time, my son that has the mental illness was a teenager, and I had two younger kids. And just so we could get out of the house, because it was so much chaos going on with him there, we would come to this park after school. First, I would have them eat dinner and then tell them to get your backpacks, let's go. So we would go to this park. One of my kids played softball. She was a pitcher. And so we would come here and practice pitching. I'm not sure what my other daughter was doing at the time. She may have been reading a book, but after we were done, practicing, we would then go to this library over here, and my daughters would do their homework, and we would literally stay in that library until it was time for us to go. The library we were shutting down, but it was just a place where we would go to get out of the house and not have to worry about my son causing issues with the rest of us. So anyway, I am actually writing a book. I've always wanted to write a book, not necessarily about a loved one having a mental illness, not about a momming a child that had a mental illness. I just always wanted to write a book because I love to read. And so I did end up starting a book, and it was on this topic, parenting a child and what all we've gone through because this child was eventually diagnosed with a serious mental illness. I have always journaled. I journaled for years, and I pulled from that journal to start writing my book. Right now I have about 50 pages, but I haven't I haven't written in quite a while. It's probably been over a year since I've even looked at it. But I didn't pull my journal out to help me with this topic, and that being the case, I'm probably going to be out of chronological order because I'm going by memory. And I'm just gonna talk about some things that happened before we realized what was actually going on. I also want to say the reason why I want to write a book on this particular topic is because I have read some really interesting books on this topic. But the thing is, they were very interesting books, they were helpful books, but they have all been written by white parents struggling for struggling with this issue. And so I don't want to exclude anyone, but I want to write on this topic from a Black mother's point of view, because I want other Black moms and dads to know that, hey, you are not alone. You're not alone in this journey. Hashtag me too, hashtag us too. We're in this together, and we need to let go of the stigma and have some serious conversations about this topic, because it's affecting a whole lot of people. So anyway, with that being said, in our case, initially had no idea what was going on. We thought maybe it was just a teen angst type of thing, but then it started escalating and getting worse each year. So my son played football, and so he played community football, and then he played high school football. And during football season, he was definitely more engaged. His behavior was better. We had positive interactions, in the family. He had positive interactions with his friends. And then it seemed like every time football season would end, then the interactions with family and friends became more negative. And a lot of times I would be thinking, like, maybe he shouldn't hang around with this person or that person. They're a bad influence on him. But other kids' parents were probably thinking the same thing about him. They were probably telling their kids, don't hang out with that kid. He's bad news. So it progressed to a point of he was no longer playing football, and he was no longer playing football because he started getting suspended from school, and his grades started dropping, and he was cutting school. Every time I turned around, the school was calling for one reason or another. And then eventually he got suspended from school, and then he would get back in, then he would get suspended again, and then eventually he got expelled from school, and we had to put him in an alternative high school. He went to the alternative high school for a while, and then he eventually got kicked out of that school because he was leaving campus to go smoke. Now, this particular school, they would allow some of the kids to leave campus to smoke, but it was only the ones who had already turned 18. And at that point, my kid hadn't turned 18, so he was prohibited from leaving the campus to go smoke. The smoking in and of itself was kind of shocking to me, because he had been against smoking and he had been an athlete. So the fact that he was now smoking, that was the first bad sign, because, he had been against smoking. So eventually I found out, I didn't know this at the time, but eventually I found out that people that have certain mental illnesses, in particular schizophrenia, they smoke because it's something in the nicotine that has a calming effect on them. And so he started smoking as a teenager, and he still chain smokes until this day. So I want to say a little bit about my personality. I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. My father was an alcoholic, and he would get violent when he drank. And then my mother was physically and verbally abusive to most of her kids. She had a favorite, but for the most part, she was verbally and physically abusive to us. And I internalized that by being a person who deconflicts. I can smell trouble a mile away. And so I try to get ahead of it and deconflict before it escalates. And that's kind of how I started handling this situation within our household. My husband, on the other hand, he's the exact opposite of that. His motto seems to be more of, if he thinks somebody is being ignorant, then, or deliberately antagonizing him, then he will respond by There's a whole bunch of birds flying over, and I hope none of them drop anything on my head. Oh, good, they've flown by. So my husband's way of dealing with people who he thinks are deliberately antagonizing him, he's like, oh, okay, you want to be ignorant? I'll show you ignorant. And then he, will escalate a situation versus de-escalating a situation. So there ended up being a lot of that going on in our household. I would try to de-escalate and get ahead of potential conflicts. So that being the case, I'm just going to go over, some incidents that happened leading up to me eventually realizing what was going on. So there was one occasion we were at a cheesecake factory, and my other son had his girlfriend with him. And so in an effort to de-escalate potential issues, I would try to, subtly arrange people around the table so that more difficult personalities wouldn't be sitting near each other. So I ended up sitting in between my husband and my son, who has this illness. And my youngest daughter, she has a pretty laid-back personality, so I strategically placed her, in between some other people who I felt had more difficult personalities. And so as we were looking at the menus, I noticed that my one son, he was displaying some OCD type tendencies, like he was avoiding touching his bare hands with the menu. He was trying to turn the pages of the menu and using his sleeve instead of touching it with his bare hand. And he was kind of struggling with that. So I just kind of discreetly started flipping, the pages of the menu for him. And I saw my husband, he noticed that, and he was like rolling his eyes and, doing what he does to escalate versus de-escalate a situation. And he was kind of looking like, okay, now what's wrong with him? That type of thing. But yeah, I noticed at that time some OCD tendencies. On another occasion, we were at a popular Italian restaurant, and then kind of out of the blue, my son just started accusing my husband of, I don't know, like maybe getting a piece of bread. You know how they put some bread for everybody to share on your table. Just out of the blue, my son was like, I was going to get that bread, and you knew I was going to get that bread, and you took it because you knew I was going to get this bread. And it was just out of nowhere, just really bizarre. And my husband was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? It was just really weird. And on another occasion, one of my younger children had borrowed a charger without asking from my son. And when he realized that, the charger wasn't where he put it, he was asking about the charger, and one of my younger kids admitted, hey, I borrowed your charger. She gave it back to him, but he just wouldn't let it go. He escalated a situation and just started being belligerent. I was actually going to not intervene. I was hoping that he would calm down, they would eventually work it out, especially since the charger had been returned to him. But he was just getting belligerent over a charger. And so I felt like at that point I had to intervene. And one thing led to another. I didn't really touch him. It was kind of like, go, just stop. You got your charger, go back in your room type of thing. And he actually called the police on me. And when the police got there, they were asking him what the problem was. Initially, they were really taking him seriously. And as well they should have, because I guess in their mind they were investigating a possible child abuse situation. But the more my son talked, I remember one of the female officers said, you're being really belligerent. And she was talking to my son at that time. She said, the way you're behaving, I don't think this is your mother's fault. The way you're acting, I believe that this started with you. And so then she asked me, is there anywhere he can go for the night so everybody can just calm down? At the time, my husband was working the night shift. He wasn't there. Eventually, my other son came home from his job, and he kind of calmed everybody down, and the police eventually left. But the police thing actually became like a pattern. Like the police was showing up at our house on a pretty regular basis from then on for one reason or another. And in our neighborhood, it's like a predominantly white neighborhood. It's only like a handful of black people, if that, living there. And so that was rather embarrassing, to say the least. So there was another occasion. I'd taken my younger daughter, her and her friend, I took them to an Ariana Grande concert. Before we left, my son was in the kitchen. He was making himself something to eat. And he had a huge mess in the kitchen. And I asked him, can you make sure when you're done cooking that you clean up the kitchen? And he said that he would. He actually, I remember him making some comment. He was making some dish, and he was saying to me, because I'm going to make this myself, because when you make it, it doesn't taste good. And he was like trying to draw me into some drama, but I didn't take the bait. I was heading out to the concert with my younger daughter and her friend. And so I just kind of ignored him and just asked him, please clean up the kitchen, because my husband would get off at 11 o'clock and he would be in the house by 12. And I didn't want my husband coming in and then this big blow up occurring over this huge mess in the kitchen. So we went to the concert, we came back, and guess what? There was a huge mess in the kitchen. My son was like down in the basement doing whatever. And so in my attempts to not escalate, I just said, you know what? And I'd actually worked that day. I was tired. It was late, but I said, I'm not even going to say anything to him. He's probably trying to bait me, trying to get me into an argument with him. If not me, then, when his dad came in, like I felt like he wanted to start something. And so I just washed the kitchen, wiped down everything, swept the floor, and just had the kitchen looking spick and span literally a few minutes before my husband got back home from work. And so on that occasion, no police. We were able to, avoid, or I was able to avoid any type of confrontation. So at any rate, there's probably a whole lot of things that happen in between that I'm not going to get into right now. But not long after that, it was actually it was like Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day, and my husband and I had gone to play tennis. And then when we came back from playing tennis, there was an ambulance. It might have been a fire truck, police cars and whatever out in front of our house. And the neighbors were outside, of course, and they were like, oh, there they go right there. And so they were letting the police know that, my son's parents, there they go right there. And so, a police officer explained to us that our son had been in the middle of the street dancing. You know how kids wear those saggy pants. He said his pants were about to fall off and this, that, and the other. And they ended up, once we got there, taking him to the hospital. We followed the ambulance to the hospital. And the crazy thing is the hospital psych ward was really packed that day. And a nurse said, I don't know what's going on, but we're going to have to wait for a bed. So my son was literally in a stretcher out in the hallway. And I knew that this was, something more than just a teenager just, causing trouble, a typical teenage behavior. I knew at that point that it was more than that, because when we went back, to talk to our son while we were waiting for him to see a doctor, he started giggling uncontrollably. I mean, literally just, he was doing that. And I was kind of like, whoa, what is going on here? So the nurse said it's probably drug-induced psychosis. But when he was eventually released from the hospital, and he did spend time in the psych ward. It may not have been on this occasion, but there was an occasion where he spent time in the psych ward, but they will only hold them sometimes 3 days, sometimes 5 days. I think my son got to stay in there 5 days only because during his stay, it included a weekend, and they don't release people. They don't do the outpatient thing or let people, release it from the hospital on the weekend. So he got to stay 2 extra days, which is really a good thing for us. At the same time, it wasn't nearly enough time. They just they write them a prescription, and then they send them on their way. I'm going to do another video about that later on, about how, there's really no help out here if they do get sent to, a psych ward. They don't stay there very long, just long enough pretty much for them to write a prescription, and then they're out. But all this to say, when my son did come home on that occasion, I looked at the paperwork that they gave him when he was released, and it said there were no drugs in his system. There were no drugs in his system. So when he got picked up by the police, he wasn't doing that because he was on drugs. And when he was giggling hysterically, he wasn't doing that because he was on drugs. And that's when I knew that this is way above my head. This was something more serious than a typical teenager just causing trouble at home. I am going to end this video for today, but I hope you all will come back for later videos, because I'm going to do one that's on a little lighter note, and it's going to be regarding how for the past 5 years my son has been medicated, and because of that I've been able to travel for work. My husband and I have been able to go on vacation. Our entire family has been able to go on vacation without any drama, and it has been wonderful. So I want to talk about that a little bit in my next video, and then I also want to talk about how difficult it is to get help for someone once they have been diagnosed with a mental illness. I want to give some background information on all that. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, be blessed.